revenues from the existing excise tax on documents for 20 years. Now that's a lot of words, so let me try to break it down so that you would understand. Back in 1963, the Land Acquisition Trust Fund was created to purchase land for parks and recreation in Florida. Originally, the money for that tax came from a tax on outdoor clothing and equipment. And then in 1968, the legislature changed the way it would be funded to a documentary tax on real estate transactions and financial documents. Then a few years ago, with the downturn of the economy, the legislature that had worked together in concert with each other to acquire lands and try to clean up rivers and waterways in the Everglades took that money that they had been using for that purpose and put it into the general budget. And so there was no money. As a result of that, a large number of groups and organizations got together, and Amendment 1 is a citizen petition. So they got citizen signatures to put this on the ballot for the citizens of Florida to decide. So the important thing with Amendment 1 for you to understand is that it is a long-term funding mechanism without relying on the legislature. It dedicates 33% of documentary stamp tax revenue over the next 20 years for environmental purposes. So it will ensure funding will not be diverted to other areas of the budget. And let me make it very clear, this is not a new tax.
Yes, yes.
The documentary stamp tax has always been there. If you buy a piece of property, you have to buy what's called a doc stamp. And that is not what this amendment says. What this amendment says is out of that doc stamp that you have to pay now by state law, that 33% of that money collected will go towards land conservation and purchase. So with Amendment 1, a vote yes would provide a long-term funding mechanism for environmental conservation without a new tax. It would remove the reliance on yearly legislative funding for water and land conservation projects, and it more than likely would enhance publicly held recreation lands, which could lead to economic growth and increased ecotourism. A vote no would not establish any long-term funding mechanism for environmental conservation, and it would leave the ability of the legislature to make budgetary decisions on a year-to-year basis, where if they didn't feel that the money was needed there, they could put it anywhere in the general budget. And it would not place language in the Florida Constitution relating to environmental conservation where it would be difficult to modify or remove. Because remember, anything that goes into the Constitution takes a 60% vote of the populace. There are over 100 organizations that are supporting Amendment 1. Some of those are like the Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, the Audubon of Florida, the Florida Trail Association, and the list goes on. There is only one organization that we know at this point that is opposing this particular amendment, and that is the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Now, Gwen, do you want me to go through all three of them, or do you want to stop for questions, or how do you want to handle this?
Yes, let's go through all three of them, and then we can share perhaps some of the questions that we've heard as you made presentations to other locations. Groups.
Okay, fine. All right, amendment number 2 is use of marijuana for certain medical conditions, and the official ballot summary says, allows the medical use of marijuana for individuals with debilitating diseases as determined by a licensed Florida physician, allows caregivers to assist patients' medical use of marijuana. The Department of Health shall register and regulate centers that produce and distribute marijuana for medical purposes and shall issue identification cards to patients and caregivers. Applies only to Florida law, does not authorize violations of federal law or any non-medical use, possession, or production of marijuana. Now, again, amendment number 2, if you remember Claudia saying how you can get an amendment before the people of Florida, amendment number 2 is also a citizen initiative amendment that was sponsored by People United for Medical Marijuana. Now, the background on amendment 2, I think it's very important that you understand what just happened in the legislature in 2014. The legislature did pass a bill that the governor signed and became law, known as Charlotte's Web. And Charlotte's Web allows for the medical use of a strain of non-psychoactive cannabis. It's a type of medical marijuana that has most of the THC removed from it. It's in liquid form. And the THC, by the way, is what gives you the high with marijuana. So there are very low amounts of that in this, this particular form that was approved by the legislature this year. According to the 2014 law that was passed, called Charlotte's Web, the medical use could be cancer or a physical condition that chronically produces symptoms of seizures or severe and persistent muscle spasms. And the example was given, like if someone has severe epilepsy or Lou Gehrig's disease were 2 examples. So the Charlotte's Web law is very specific.
Right.
What happens with Amendment 2 is it broadens the picture, it broadens the individuals who could be treated by medical marijuana following the following guidelines. 1, physicians have to authorize the use of the medical marijuana by their patients. It requires, Amendment 2 requires the Department of Health to register and regulate centers that produce and distribute medical marijuana. It provides for, and there would have to be the issuance of identification cards to patients who were taking it, as well as caregivers who were assisting them. It applies only to Florida residents, so you couldn't have somebody come from Georgia to get some medical marijuana and then go back to Georgia. They have to be a Florida resident. It prohibits the operation of a car or boat while under the influence of marijuana, and it allows institutions to ban marijuana from their facilities. So it's rather comprehensive, but again, it broadens what is already in place in the state of Florida. So a vote yes for Amendment 2 would provide for the legal use of marijuana for medical purposes by individuals with debilitating diseases as determined by a licensed Florida physician. It would maintain the current prohibition on marijuana use for recreational purposes, and it would require the Department of Health to monitor the centers that produce and distribute marijuana, as well as the Department of Health would be responsible for the issuance of the ID cards to patients and caregivers. A vote no would not affect the current prohibition on marijuana use in the state of Florida. It would not do anything with Charlotte's Web that was passed in 2014. So it would maintain the status quo, and it would not place language in the Florida Constitution relating to medical marijuana where it would be difficult to modify or remove. The supporting organizations are People United for Medical Marijuana, Florida Cannabis Action Network, Libertarian Party of Florida, ACLU, Florida State Conference of the NAACP, and a few others. The opposing organizations, the Florida Family Policy Council, Florida Medical Association, Florida Police Chiefs Association, Florida Sheriff's Association, and the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Amendment 3. Amendment 3 is prospective appointment of certain judicial vacancies, and the official ballot summary says, proposing an amendment to the state constitution requiring the governor to prospectively fill vacancies in a judicial office to which election for retention applies resulting from the justices or judges reaching the mandatory retirement age or failure to qualify for a retention election, and allowing prospective